Once again, it's a pleasure to host you all for this workshop. I've already introduced myself in the previous session, and I did introduce the organization which is hosting this workshop, Better Results, along with their supporting partners, including Lloyd, which is their outreach partner, and Agnian Legal Tech and Solution, which is their knowledge partner. In order to save time, I won't be repeating the introduction that we did in the previous session. In the previous session, we gained some sort of in-depth knowledge on the technical aspects of cryptocurrency underlying technology, and also certain questions that were asked from Ajit sir related to the investment and how you can mitigate the risk and invest, make the decisions related to the investment depending upon your own risk appetite. And also, what are the different things that you can do to understand the technology, to understand the technical aspects underlying this technology, and see what are the other resources that are available outside to gain more knowledge. He also shared his personal experience and the real life scenarios, how it's impacting the cryptocurrency nationally and globally, and his comparison with cryptocurrency as an asset class, and his reservation towards not taking the extreme outlook. On one hand, you have people who kind of worship cryptocurrency at a philosophical level. And on the other hand, you have people who are completely ignoring it, and how to have a balanced view in between. In this session, we'll be speaking about legal and regulatory issues in the cryptocurrency, especially in the Indian ecosystem. And in this session, we are joined with Rohan Bagai, who is a corporate lawyer and a partner at AZB's corporate and fintech practice. He's also been recognized as top individual lawyer in the fintech sphere by Forbes Legal Power List 2020. He has been exclusively recommended as a law expert on the Advisory Excellence website. He holds a Master's of Law with specialization in corporate laws from New York University School of Law. He has a wide range of technology and financial service experience with a special focus on payments, e-commerce, privacy and data protection, and online gaming. He regularly speaks on emerging topics related to fintech and data privacy at international and regional conferences. Excuse me, am I audible?
Yes, Sandeep, you're audible.
All right. Conferences organized by the leading institutes, iTech Law, Corporate Counsel Association of India, Payments and Card Summit. He has also authored articles, Indian chapters on the various esteemed publications, including Lexology, Getting the Deal Through, Mondac, Legal 500, and on a host of subjects, including blockchain, cybersecurity, regulations governing payment aggregators, and data privacy. If you are a law student or a policy student and you are interested into these kind of topics, or if you're in-house counsel, working in a law firm or chamber, it's hard to miss the content that he has written. So we are really thankful for him to share these kind of knowledge in such a niche area and ever-growing area, very dynamic area where a lot of things are being discussed at national and international level, some at a very controversial level and some at very technical and scholarship level. So thank you so much, Rohan sir, for joining us and providing your insights during this workshop. In this session, we are going to touch upon three major things. First is the current law and regulatory aspects, the legal and regulatory aspects related to cryptocurrency market and ecosystem in India. And then we'll see how the government is responding or probably reacting to it, and what needs to be done in legal and regulatory landscape in the future. I will be, delegating the major time to Rohan sir to speak and asking very limited questions. In between, wherever I feel that there is some interesting thing that is coming to my mind or the audience is sharing, we'll be putting on those questions. During the entire session, if you don't think that I'm probably audible or clear, please let me know. I'm suffering from viral, so my voice will be a bit down, but let me know if I'm not audible. So over to you, Rohan sir.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for the kind introduction. Am I audible? I'll just check first.
Yes, sir. Clear and loud.
Okay, great. So at the outset, let me start with thanking Bettering Results for giving me this opportunity to participate in this workshop. Thank you, Sandeep, for moderating the session. even while you are unwell. And I hope you get well soon.
No issue, sir.
I think before I start the discussion on crypto, let me first confess, I'm not an expert in crypto, unlike your previous speaker, Ajit Khurana, who is a stalwart in the industry. I'm only a legal practitioner who's been fortunate to assist clients in the fintech and the e-commerce space for more than a decade. I've tried to help clients deal with legal and regulatory issues, more often issues which do not have answers under the law, or rather there are gaps under regulations. So I'd like to probably classify the role I play as a regulatory lawyer, or somebody who's weathering the storm with the clients who are entering into a space which is nascent and which is evolving. And I think crypto is yet another space which is going through this evolution, where regulations, I think, are eventually going to catch up with the technology. There is a lot of discussion on crypto around the world. It's become a buzzword. It's considered to be the next big thing after the invention of internet. I'm sure Ajit, in his previous session, although I couldn't attend, must have spoken at length about the technical aspects and the operational aspects of how a crypto investment works, etc. So I will try to focus more on what I am familiar with, which is the legal and regulatory aspects, which, as Sandeep said. And I think it's important to understand that the world is actually now accepting cryptocurrency with both arms. There are economies in the world who are recognizing crypto as a digital asset. There are other economies which are associating it as a security or a commodity. And then there are, let's say, a few, or perhaps only the one country which we know of, El Salvador, which has accepted Bitcoin as a legal tender. So there are multiple models which are being considered across the world. There are big names in the industry, likes of Elon Musk, who've maintained that paper money is going away. And they believe that crypto has far more value than what is associated with the paper money. Of course, there are pros and cons, but there are obviously viewpoints which we will need to consider when we, as India, march into the regulations as far as crypto is concerned. There are different realms and spaces of industry which are accepting cryptocurrency. In fact, even the football world is not that far. I was reading somewhere that even Messi, in his transfer from Barcelona to PSG, is being offered a payment in crypto tokens, some fan tokens which the club is offering. So clearly the world is getting ready for the crypto revolution. And I think what we'll probably need to focus on during the discussion today is, where does India stand? And if I were to start the discussion by probably answering it in one word to Sandeep, what you said, what is the regulatory environment for crypto in India? I think the short answer to that is, the answer is yes, it is uncertain. Uncertain is the word which I can associate with the regulatory environment. And what is the reason for this regulatory uncertainty? Stems from the fact that there is no law or there is no regulation which regulates or gives any recognition to either a crypto asset, a virtual currency, a crypto transaction, or any crypto exchange related business which is facilitating trade in crypto. So these nuances, these concepts are alien when it comes to the Indian regulation. There is no law which is recognizing these in any manner, in any form. But one thing which has been very clear, and which is what I think all of us have been hearing over the years, is that India's stance towards crypto has always been negative. We may have been gung-ho on the use of blockchain technology, which is the DLT, the distributed ledger technology, which is the underlying technology on which crypto works. But when it comes to crypto, there is a lot of pessimism. And I'd probably want to give some background and shed some light on events and developments that have actually created this uncertainty in this space. And how do we land up in the position where we stand today in August 2021? So we are already, I think, familiar, and my apologies if there is some repetition in terms of what Ajit may have spoken about. But what I'll probably briefly talk about is the fact that when cryptocurrency as a concept came out in 2008, and it was conceptualized by people say it's an unknown person with a pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto. And this concept became associated with all the coders, all the programmers, all the techies, where in 2009, it started being associated with an open source software, which could be used in order to solve certain solutions, which centralized systems are not able to solve. A decentralized protocol, which is going to help solve for various issues which everyone in the world is facing, including the industry. But it was only in 2010 when actually the first transaction involving a crypto happened. And that was with the first crypto, which is Bitcoin, where a programmer actually used Bitcoins and purchased pizzas as a medium of exchange. So it's very interesting how this concept has evolved from a software code to a medium of exchange. And after, obviously, Bitcoin gained prominence and popularity, there were more cryptocurrencies which came up. There were likes of Limecoin, Peercoin, etc., which also entered the market. With more and more cryptocurrencies entering the market, there was a lot of volatility. Bitcoin prices started to move high and low. It rose as high as $16 per coin and as low as $7. I know it may sound very bizarre to you today, given the prices we are talking now, but when you look at the times where Bitcoin trading started in 2009, 2010, these were big numbers, and these were actually resulting in a lot of volatility. And there were a lot of controversies over the use of cryptocurrency for wrongful means in the dark web, for instance, where there were claims that crypto is actually being used for purchase of drugs and for all the wrong reasons, maybe even including purchase of guns. So all these years, for the first 4 or 5 years, there was always a lot of discussion on what is the utility of crypto and what does crypto stand for the world at large. It was only in 2013, in December, where RBI actually came up with an advisory. It was the first time this crypto terminology or a virtual currency terminology, and I'm going to use this interchangeably because for whatever reason, the regulator has been using the term virtual currency, but ultimately these are intended to cover cryptocurrencies. And the RBI actually came out with a press release, as I said, to caution the public at large, the holders, the users of crypto, and try to highlight certain risks which are associated with crypto. It clarified expressly that crypto or any form of virtual currency has not been authorized by the regulator. It has not been given any kind of license. And therefore, anybody who is dealing with cryptocurrency needs to deal with caution. That was the first time when RBI came out with such an advisory. Mind you, this was no regulation, this was no law. This was just an advisory, a press release which came out. Years later, there were more developments in the sphere in India. There were fundamental changes in the global scene as well. There were new cryptocurrency exchanges which sprung up, likes of Zebpay, which Ajit was very closely associated with, was one of the early adopters of crypto exchange in the space. Ethereum came on the block, which is often termed as Ether. We've always talked about crypto and associated with Bitcoin, but Ether is actually another very, very prominent and actually the second most valuable cryptocurrency, which was introduced in 2015. And obviously, there was a lot of discussion on how crypto can be used and what is the utility of crypto. And then, as I said, there was more discussion within the RBI ranks. The Reserve Bank, as the financial services regulator, again came out with advisories in 2017. Yet again, highlighting and cautioning everybody around that Bitcoin or any virtual currency is not being sanctioned or it's not being authorized by any of the regulator, and therefore the holders of the currencies need to hold it at their risk. So all along, actually, if you look at it, until 2017, the regulator has always maintained a very cautionary stance. There was nothing which talked about coming out with a law or a regulation. And then that led to people asking questions. If crypto is not authorized or licensed by the regulator, then why isn't the government coming out with the regulations? And that is when, in this spirit, there were some people who approached the Supreme Court of India. There were PILs filed, public interest litigations filed, which were asking the Supreme Court in terms of why the government is not coming out with a regulatory framework. And they wanted virtual currencies to have a certain framework. And in the litigation, Supreme Court then directed the Reserve Bank and other concerned ministries of the government to clarify their stance on crypto. And they urged the government to tell them that if you believe that crypto is not right and there are some issues associated with it, then why not come out with a certain report or certain clarity in terms of why is crypto not recognized under law and what are the issues associated with it. So this led to the government coming out with a committee. It constituted a committee which was interministerial in nature. It had stakeholders from multiple regulators, from Ministry of Finance, RBI, SEBI, etc., to study the issues which are associated with virtual currencies. And it requested the committee to come out with recommendations on what should the government do and how it should tackle the subject of crypto. On the same lines of the RBI, even the Ministry of Finance within the government came out with advisories and press releases. In fact, they went even far to compare a virtual currency with a Ponzi scheme. They alerted the users of the illegal activities which are associated with such a crypto asset. And it clarified the government stance that the government has not recognized it as legal tender or currency. And I'm going to talk a little more about what a legal tender and a currency really means. But the government said it is not something which is akin to, say, a money or a money equivalent. It's not a rupee equivalent where you can use it as a medium of exchange. It's not backed by the government of India. And when government came out so strongly through the Ministry of Finance, the RBI obviously felt now is the time that I need to go ahead and go for the kill. And unfortunately or fortunately, the RBI, being the financial services regulator, is bound by a certain regulatory framework, the RBI Act, which is the legislation which entrusts certain responsibilities and gives certain powers to the Reserve Bank in terms of what it can do, what it cannot do. Now, clearly, the RBI Act did not envisage, as I said, anything on the lines of a virtual currency or a cryptocurrency. So what RBI could really do is not to stop any crypto exchanges or crypto businesses from operating. It used a certain route, which is within its powers, which is within its framework, to actually issue a directive to its regulated entities. The RBI issued a directive to the banks, which are under the regulatory framework of the RBI. It directed the banks not to deal in cryptocurrencies. These were times in 2018 when the banks were openly providing services to certain crypto businesses. They were actually providing loans against tokens. They were actually also providing a facility where crypto could have been kept as a collateral. And they were opening bank accounts for crypto exchanges. So 2018, RBI said, nothing doing. you need to stop dealing with crypto businesses. You need to stop dealing in crypto transactions. And this directive also indicated that the banks have 3 months to exit any relationship they have with any of those crypto businesses which are dealing with those transactions. Now, what was the result of the RBI directive? The result was, as I was mentioning, the crypto businesses do not have access to RBI's banking systems. They are not permitted to maintain bank accounts for their crypto businesses. Customers who are actually opening accounts with exchanges in order to trade in cryptos cannot use their money, their INR deposits or their fiat currency, as it is called, to transfer money to crypto exchanges, because anything which flows to the crypto exchanges needs to flow through banking channels. Now, if the RBI tells the banks not to deal crypto exchanges, then obviously it in a way restrains not only the industry but also the customers from dealing with it. This resulted in actually a suspension of crypto operations across the board. The industry was badly impacted because what had really happened was that RBI had actually cut the lifeline for the crypto exchange, which was money which is flowing through the customers' bank accounts for trading and for purchase and sale of crypto exchange. Seeing this, the industry got together. They used industry association as a forum. IMEI, which is associated with the internet and the tech industry, was used as a platform to file a petition before the Supreme Court to challenge the directive which the RBI had issued to banks. The petition also challenged the powers the RBI had to impose a certain ban, because it said that if virtual currency or cryptocurrency is not really recognized under law, then what is the domain, or what is actually the power under which the RBI is actually coming out with such a directive? What is it that RBI can really do in terms of curtailing the rights of the crypto exchanges to engage with the banking system? Now, this petition was filed and there were hearings before the court. The Supreme Court heard both the regulator, which is the Reserve Bank of India, the government, as well as the industry. And obviously, this took some time. In the meantime, in 2019, the government, which had constituted a committee, as I talked about, the IMC, the Interministerial Committee, came out with a report. And that Interministerial Committee made recommendations to ban private cryptocurrencies. And interestingly, they also talked about a certain concept of introduction of a sovereign currency, a sovereign digital currency in the name of central bank digital currency, a CBDC, which is going to be regulated by the sovereign through a certain regulator such as the RBI. So this was the committee's response to the private cryptocurrencies like an Ethereum or a Bitcoin, which were getting very prominent. And obviously, this was on the lines of what the government and the RBI have all along been thinking. The private cryptocurrencies have not come to stage where they should be recognized, they should be legalized. And obviously, this was also intended to come up as a legislation. So the committee, along with the report, also enclosed a certain draft bill, which was intended to be considered by the ministry for the law making and the legislation purposes. Now, in the meantime, while this report came out and the draft bill came out, something very interesting happened. The Supreme Court litigation, which was going on from 2018, where it was instituted because of the RBI directive, came to a conclusion that the RBI directive is actually not reasonable and it is not proportionate. So the Supreme Court actually came out with a judgment striking down the RBI directive. And while striking down the directive, the Supreme Court made some very pertinent observations. It recognized the powers which the Reserve Bank of India has as a financial services regulator, but at the same time, it actually questioned the RBI that if it had not found any adverse impact on the activities of the crypto exchanges, then why should it actually curtail and actually restrict their operations? Because the RBI in the litigation before the Supreme Court was unable to actually produce any evidence which was to demonstrate that the crypto exchanges have had any negative impact on the banking system. And actually the RBI admitted that there is no law which prohibits trading in virtual currencies. So the Supreme Court said if there is nothing under the law which stops crypto exchanges from operating, then why should the RBI play spoil sport and actually restrict the operations of the crypto exchanges and cut the lifeline, as I said, to the banking system? Now, with this judgment, obviously the industry was in very high spirits. It gave a new life to the crypto industry. But then still, crypto was not out of the woods. And I'll tell you why I say this. Because while the Supreme Court had struck down the RBI directive, which stopped them from accessing banking services or from banks dealing crypto exchanges, the government still did not come out and party with the crypto exchanges. They did not give any legitimacy to crypto exchanges. Practically speaking, on the ground, if you ask the industry, banks were still reluctant to support crypto exchanges. The banks were still stopping crypto transactions from happening. There were indications that they are getting informal nudges from the RBI. There was nothing formal which was there, but the crypto exchanges were still getting impacted. And eventually, we come to 2021, when the government said it's COVID year 2020, so let's postpone whatever is going to happen. 21, they wanted to come out with another bill on the lines of the bill which the ministerial committee had recommended, where private cryptocurrencies were proposed to be banned, and a sovereign CBDC, a central bank digital currency, was proposed to be introduced. The bill was likely to be tabled, but it actually never saw the light of the day. It never came up before the parliament. So all along, what has really happened is there have been warnings, there have been cautions, there have been advisories issues, but the law or the regulation of cryptocurrency has always come up, but it has never reached the parliament. It has never been deliberated. It has never been discussed with industry stakeholders, in so many words. So I think what has really happened all along is that it has shook the industry from time to time. The government has given indications through these bodies that it is likely to ban cryptocurrencies, prohibit any trading. And there have also been certain positions taken by ministers, where in one of the press releases issued or the public statements issued by the finance minister earlier this year, the government said it proposes to take a calibrated approach towards crypto exchanges, and it would rather decide how to implement crypto exchanges as opposed to imposing a blanket ban. So this obviously puts the crypto exchanges in a mix, because at one juncture you hear of a law which is looking to ban private cryptocurrencies, and the other hand there is a government spokesperson or a minister who's making statements probably to calm the nerves of the industry, that we will consider and take a calibrated approach. And I think it's unfortunate that despite the RBI directive being struck down, the banks have not been really very, very supportive of the crypto exchanges. They've actually been very off and on. They've even severed ties with crypto exchanges, even citing the RBI directive. which is wrongly been cited in the past, to which the RBI has actually come out clarifying its stance that it's never asked the banks to rely on a directive which has been struck down by the Supreme Court. And to that, RBI said, what we expect of the banks is really to do the KYC checks, to do the AML checks, to ensure that when there is a cross-border transaction or a remittance, ensure compliance with FEMA, the Foreign Exchange Management Law. So I think all in all, the industry position has been very uncertain. There has been utterances, there have been press releases issued by the RBI. The deputy governor in his speeches has made RBI's approach towards crypto very clear. It has actually even clarified that RBI is looking towards a phased implementation of a certain central bank digital currency. So they're not even discussing anything about the private cryptocurrency. So there are indications that the CBDC is actually going to be on its way. Now, in what form and shape it comes, it's very difficult to say. But this has been broadly the stance which the regulators have been taking. So to your question, Sandeep, on the first point, the regulatory landscape after this long story, which I have elaborated, has been very rocky, and it continues to be so until the government comes out with, I think, an express recognition to cryptocurrency, or it recognizes a form in which it proposes to regulate it. Unfortunately, this is how the position is going to be until we see any movement from the government.
Great, yeah. And so from my understanding, we have seen that, in different jurisdictions, there are different concerns of the regulatory authorities as well as of the government. We see that, some governments are concerned about, say, environmental issues. And there are certain people who are very inclined towards adopting digital currency, and now they are backing out, citing the environmental concerns. And then we have people who are probably distancing themselves because of the crime-related issues associated with being used in the dark web and whatnot. There are certain governments that are, concerned because of the tax evasion and what other issues. So from your understanding and all this journey of, cryptocurrency, or I would say lack of journey of cryptocurrency in the Indian ecosystem, what do you think could be the major concerns of Indian government, or a government of a country like ours, where they would be resident to not come up with the legislation, not give the exact clarity about, the development of cryptocurrency ecosystem in India?
Sure. So I think, Sandeep, as I was mentioning, there have been advisories issued by the RBI and the Ministry of Finance. Even the report, the Interministerial Committee report, has observations, and it has analyzed various models, as I said, across jurisdictions in terms of how other countries are looking to implement cryptocurrency regulations. And obviously, while discussing those, they've discussed certain negatives, or I'd say cons. When I say there are pros and there are cons, there are certain cons which they have highlighted while discussing. So there are 3 or 4 concerns I think which come to mind. One is, I think, which is the most prominent thing, which I think which has come out, is the cybersecurity concern. Now, because electronic wallets house these cryptocurrencies, and these obviously are prone to hacking or cybersecurity attacks, whether you call it a malware attack or elsewhere. And we've seen multiple instances over the years where cybersecurity instances have impacted not just the Indian exchanges, maybe very few instances in India, but across the world we've seen instances. In fact, as recent as this week itself, I was reading somewhere in the papers that there is a crypto business which has actually been suffering because of a crypto heist.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's actually the cybersecurity risk being the first thing. I think second, which I think is stemming out from these advisories, is probably the distrust which the government has in a decentralized technology. Now, because crypto, as its core technology, is a decentralized technology which works on a host of computer networks. There is no central regulator which is supervising how the transactions happen. It works on a peer-to-peer basis. customers or users of cryptocurrency really don't have any recourse when there are any disputes. So I think the issue with the regulators perhaps also have, to my mind, is distrust the fact that there is no regulatory authority, which is what we are usually very used to seeing, right? You look at securities law, you have a regulator there, SEBI. You look at financial services, vis-a-vis the regulated entities, there is an RBI. And the insurance, there is IRDA. So Indian regulatory mindset, if I could call it, Sandeep, has always been on having a certain regulated authority or a regulator who's actually supervising the sphere or the ecosystem. This is one such space which does not have a centralized authority. And that is where I think the CBDC, which I was talking about, the central bank digital currency, is to my mind some kind of hybrid, where it's like best of both the worlds which the government is looking to achieve. Use the technology, which is the blockchain technology, basis which these cryptocurrencies work, but also have a certain regulator which is behind it. So I think that is another thing. And I think, as you mentioned rightly, there are also concerns with crypto being used for illegal activities, certain illicit activities, especially given the fact that it's an anonymous, pseudonymous kind of a system where there could be breaches. And I think one issue which I will also talk about maybe a little in detail later is the issue of cross-border transactions, where we have FEMA as the principal law, foreign exchange management law, which governs cross-border inflows and outflows of foreign exchange. Now, how do you deal with the scenario where you are transferring your crypto asset to another exchange, another address, which is anonymous, which doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a KYC. You can do KYC of the users who are interacting with you, registering with you on the platform, in the exchange. But what if you were to transfer it to another exchange? So how do you deal with issues of AML, the anti-money laundering, which is a global standard, right? Which the FATF puts into proof. And there are obviously scenarios where there are risks which have been highlighted. I'm not aware, and obviously this is not something which has been talked about enough, but there are risks associated with use of crypto money for funding terrorism or other such illicit activities. So these are some, I think, negatives which the government is, I think, weighing when it comes to looking at regulating cryptocurrency. And obviously, I think let's not forget mentioning that these crypto assets are also quite volatile in nature. Unlike your fiat currencies, which have a certain central authority, obviously there is some control which is put in place by these regulators, whether you talk about the Federal Reserve, whether you talk about the RBI and the other regulators in other jurisdictions. So there are banks looking at how to deal with the currency and actually the volatility. So the issue is that there is also a price volatility issue. There's a tendency with cryptocurrency that there is going to be a very huge market fluctuation. And there is also a school of thought, I think, somewhere within the regulator, which believes that the prices of cryptocurrencies really do not have any correlation to the underlying asset. So, and I'll try to explain this to you. So, and this is a school of thought. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, that when you hold a share or a security, there is an underlying asset which is associated with the company, its performance, and ultimately there is something which you can correlate to. Unfortunately, when we invest in a cryptocurrency, there is very little information you have. There is very little transparency we have in terms of how these price movements are really happening. And obviously, I think the regulator is also concerned because what cryptocurrency is really doing, Sandeep, is creating some kind of a parallel monetary system. And obviously, the regulator sees this as a perceived threat to its existence. So I think being the monetary regulator, there's always, I think, some risk it perceives that what if this comes up and it is going to challenge us. So I don't know. So obviously, this has not been documented in so many words, and there is no regulation which is really coming out. But I think these are thoughts and these are some, I think, remarks which have come out basis whatever has been published by the regulators, by these committees in public domain. So I think these are some of the risks I think the government has in mind, which I can think of.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. Means a lot of jurisdictions are trying to address these risks and trying to classify or regulate cryptocurrency in different categories in their own different way. But now speaking about, say, the international risk, whether it's related to, say, terrorism financing, whether it's anti-money laundering, whether it's transfer of cryptocurrency from one jurisdiction to another, means from my limited experience, working with a couple of entities, and I've seen there are few countries where it's recognized, and it adds a lot of value to the business because of the faster transactions, easy to use, a lot of other reasons. It makes a lot of business sense when you are involved into it. Obviously, it has certain drawbacks, but from your understanding, what are the major international challenges where you see that the governments from different jurisdictions needs to probably come together and work together to formulate that kind of, because one challenge that you pointed out is you can do the KYC for someone who's depositing on your exchange, trading on your exchange, but what if you have to transfer from one exchange to another? And one reason why the cryptocurrency is so popular is because of its, I would say, international use. It's far easier for it. In India, if you just want to use in India, you can do Paytm. It's very quick, very reliable. But if you have to transfer it to another jurisdiction, that's where the challenge is. And I think that's where, again, the cryptocurrency becomes important. So do you think there is a requirement of some sort of international authority to make sure that this kind of illegal activities are not getting involved in this? At the same time, there is requirement, some sort of model law or central authority to deal with these kind of things. And what are the major challenges first?
Right. So I think, Sandeep, yes, international authority is a good suggestion, but I think the problem which it will always will remain is that even if there is a central or international body which is regulating crypto transactions across the world between exchanges, there will need to be a change in the domestic law. There will need to be a change in the domestic regulation. And so it's very well to have treaties, conventions, and these international agreements between countries where there is some kind of cooperation, whether it is about sharing data of transactions which are suspicious in nature in order to do KYC AML checks, or to deal with certain kind of financial crimes in scenarios where the possibility of tracking the individual which is behind the transaction is very difficult. And I think to my mind, the starting point, at least for India, and I think this is something, obviously, like I said, India is in a different position altogether, Sandeep. The world is looking at cryptocurrency in different ways. There are other mature jurisdictions. There is US, Japan, Singapore, which have come out with their own form of regulation to regulate crypto exchanges. If I were to, let's say, generalize it, broadly, they classify cryptocurrency as a digital asset. So they are looking at treating it as a security or a commodity or something which can be traded. And therefore, as I said, they aren't examples where you will actually look at a country looking at a cryptocurrency as a legal tender, something you can use akin to money or rupee. So I think the first and foremost, to my mind, and I can bucketize, I think, a few changes which will be required in the regulations if I were to solve this and try to consider looking at the kind of issues which the cryptocurrency will need to solve in order to bring certainty. One, I think, as we are discussing, is going to be, and this is the most important, how do you want to actually categorize cryptocurrency? Do you categorize it as a digital version of money, as a legal tender? Because India has certain laws which expressly recognizes legal tender. There is a Coinage Act which recognizes how coins can be issued by the government. And then there is the RBI Act. The regulator also has powers when it comes to a legal tender, when it is also responsible for issuing the currency notes. So these legislations only recognize actually coins which are minted by the government, or banknotes which are issued by the RBI's legal tender today. If cryptocurrency, Sandeep, has to be considered as a legal tender, we'll need to look at amendments in these laws. And if I were to be realistic, the way we've been obviously looking at the way the government has been trying to solve for this cryptocurrency issue, it looks unlikely where we stand that the government is actually going to recognize it as a form of legal tender. I think it is likely that India may take a position on the lines of other countries, recognize it as a digital asset as opposed to legal tender. Whether you classify it as a security, a commodity, a derivative, depending on what you want to classify it as, an asset class, you will need to amend those relevant laws. And of course, this categorization, Sandeep, will also be critical because it will determine who is your financial services regulator. If you classify it as a security, then SEBI is the right authority, which is going to look at how the crypto regulations are going to evolve. If you classify it as akin to a medium of exchange, a payment system, the likes of, say, a Visa or a MasterCard and these card networks, and there are these payment industries, regulated entities which are operating. So if you're looking at that, then RBI is the right regulator. And obviously, depending on how you classify, then it will really depend on how these entities which are performing their roles and functions within the crypto ecosystem, your exchanges, will need to be licensed or authorized by the regulator, which is what is the trend elsewhere. And now I think I also want to maybe delve a little deeper into the second issue, which I think to my mind is the most critical. India is actually an exchange control jurisdiction. And what do I mean when I say exchange control jurisdiction? Whenever there is an inflow or an outflow of foreign exchange, it's a regulated activity. RBI is the authority which is being entrusted with the responsibility to look at any laws, anything to do with foreign exchange transactions. So naturally, whenever there is any inflow and outflow, it is the RBI which will always scrutinize transactions, either on its own or through certain authorized dealer banks. There are these banks which have been given powers by the RBI under the Foreign Exchange Management Law to actually act as dealers of foreign exchange. So a bank who's actually helping you with the banking transactions will actually be responsible to make reportings to the bank, to the central bank, which is the RBI. So I think what is going to be important in context of crypto, and now let's come to maybe the issue you were trying to also highlight, that how do you deal with a scenario where a crypto asset is transferred from jurisdiction to another? I think the first and foremost issue which you need to solve, Sandeep, is that a transaction which is involving an Indian resident and a non-resident user outside India classifies as a cross-border transaction. There will be an inflow or outflow of money because obviously any crypto asset, assuming it is involving a fiat currency, at least for now I'm taking that example, will need to be categorized as one of the permissible transactions. And the RBI, through the FEMA machinery, has actually classified specific transactions which are permissible transactions, depending on the nature. If it's a capital account transaction, something on the lines of acquisition of shares, purchasing immovable property, loans, guarantees, these are classified, Sandeep, as capital account transactions. These are specifically permitted by the government and they can flow through banking channels. Other than these specified transactions, you need government approval before the transaction can actually happen cross-border, which means that if a crypto transaction were to be classified as a capital account transaction, which is akin to purchase and sale of securities, which is also a permissible capital account transaction, unless and until a crypto transaction falls within the realm of any of these permissible transactions, it will always be subject to a government or a regulatory approval, which would mean that if, Sandeep, I have to transfer certain money to you on account of a sale of crypto asset by you sitting in Dubai, I will actually be subject to the FEMA transaction, which would mean that unless and until it's a permissible transaction, the money cannot go in and out, and which is something which the crypto transaction will also need to fall in, right? Unless and until the crypto transaction falls in any of those categories, that will not be permissible. The second big bucket, which Sandeep, FEMA envisages, is a current account transaction. Now, what are these current account transactions? These are transactions which will usually happen in connection with foreign trade. When I say foreign trade, it means export or import of goods or services. So these transactions are relatively relaxed. These can be done without any prior approval because these are being done in the ordinary course of business. So when somebody is importing or exporting goods or services, you don't need to go to the government or the RBI and seek approval because these are current account transactions. As long as you can demonstrate these are associated with these categories of current account transactions which I envisage, they are fine. Of course, there are certain kind of transactions for which the government has put a certain price ceiling, ceiling in terms of the limits, the monetary limits. But all in all, I think current account transactions are liberalized. So there is no issue. But I think if we have to now look at crypto transaction as a current account transaction, Sandeep, it will need to be seen whether a crypto transaction will fall within an import or an export of a good or a service or a software. Today, there is no law in India, as I discussed, which envisages crypto transactions in any manner. There is no virtual currency or there is no cryptocurrency terminology used in any laws. So to classify today as a good or a service or a software in absence of any jurisprudence is very difficult. So this is one other uncertainty which is there. So you can't classify it as a capital account transaction today. You can't classify it as a current account transaction, which would mean that if it doesn't fall in any of the permissible categories, naturally you'll need to go to the regulator and seek an approval. Now, obviously, when we look at crypto exchanges where transactions are happening in thousands on a day-to-day basis, it's impractical for each transaction to go to the regulator and we get a specific approval there. So unless and until crypto transaction as a category is expressly recognized under the foreign exchange management laws, there will always be uncertainty, Sandeep, when it comes to how these transactions are dealt. And let me tell you, the prime example of this is the recent scenario, which I think all of us would have read about in the papers, the WazirX investigation, where the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, which is actually the authority which is responsible for investigation of all the FEMA violations, is investigating certain transactions associated with cryptocurrencies, where WazirX is the crypto exchange which is involved. And during the course of that investigation, it has sought information and explanation from WazirX as the exchange in terms of how the transfers were happening from one user of WazirX to another crypto exchange elsewhere. Now, you can put in controls as a crypto exchange by limiting your user base to Indian residents. Let's for a moment, even assume for a moment that we would want to limit the user base of crypto exchanges only a resident. There is no non-resident involved, just to get out of the FEMA issue. And I understand your point that you lose the real value of a crypto exchange or a cryptocurrency transaction if you make it local. But if for a moment we were to even deal with that kind of scenario, you can probably curtail the fiat currency transaction by saying, okay, I will ensure that when the money is going as a crypto exchange, it will only get routed through a custodial account or escrow account into a bank account of a resident who has a bank account in India, an AD bank account in India, which means that it's only a transaction between me and another resident, an Indian bank to an Indian bank. And therefore, I'm able to curtail money going outside India. But how do you curtail the use case which is offered by many of these crypto exchanges today, where you and I can also transfer our crypto asset whether it's a Bitcoin, an Ethereum, or any other, to another crypto exchange, or to transfer it to another address which is anonymous, and where there is no name associated with it. Now, in such a transaction where there is a transfer involved outside the crypto exchange ecosystem, where you're involving a third party ecosystem, obviously there will be no information which will be there with somebody like a WazirXA in the current example. So they will be obviously looking at examples of how, or they will have to deal with transactions of how money has not gone out of the country, but since it's a crypto to crypto transaction where you may be exchanging crypto between two resident and non-resident users, it will still fall within the FEMA scanner. And ultimately, the fact of the matter, Sandeep, is you and I today can take a very liberal position saying that if the Foreign Exchange Management Act does not have a definition of cryptocurrency, it does not envisage virtual currency in any form, then where is the ED or the FEMA law getting its power? That is, I think, the liberal position we can take. But I think the fact of the matter is, in today's world, in the way the cross-border transactions are happening, if the government needs to be satisfied that you are not breaching any crypto transaction, we are not breaching any FEMA laws when it comes to a cross-border transaction, they will need to start somewhere. They will need to ask questions. They will need to understand who are the users involved. Is the money going outside India? What is the nature of transaction? And unless and until our laws and regulations have these answers, there will always be the risks associated with what today WazirX is posing. I think on this note, I would probably want to also touch upon another issue, Sandeep, which is very, very relevant in the way the crypto exchanges operate today. Today, all crypto exchanges in India, at least to my knowledge, operate under an IT-enabled service model. And I'll try to explain what I'm saying. When it comes to any kind of foreign direct investment, FDI, in any of these exchanges, they have been taking a position that they are actually technology platforms, they are facilitators of a transaction, and therefore they are not associated with any financial services business. They claim the 100% automatic route, which is without government approval when it comes to any FDI investments in these exchanges, claiming that what they're doing is an IT-enabled business, and therefore it's nothing to do with financial services, and it's totally fine. But I think today there is also a certain category under the FDI policy which envisages other financial services, which in the industry terms we call it the OFS category, which expressly says that if a company in India is receiving FDI and it is actually engaged in financial services but not regulated by a financial services regulator, or there is any doubt in terms of whether there is any regulator which is supervising that business or not, such a entity which is accepting FDI will be subject, and that FDI will be subject to the government approval, which means that today when businesses are taking the position that they are IT-enabled services businesses, if the government were to tomorrow take a position that what you are really doing is akin to a digital asset facilitation transaction, which is a financial services activity. Therefore, you are undertaking a financial services business, not a technology business per se. And it is not, if it is not expressly regulated by SEBI or an RBI, there could be another issue as far as FDI is concerned, where any of these crypto exchanges in India which are operating, if they are recharacterized or reclassified as a financial services business, all these FDI conditions which are today applicable to a financial services business will also get triggered in their case. And I think lastly, I would want to maybe bring out one more nuance, which I think is not very well discussed or understood today. But I think as a legal practitioner, I see that as another open question, is when any money is facilitated through these crypto exchanges. Now, how usually a crypto exchange works is that it would have a certain money wallet where all the fiat currency will be collected, which is, let's say, for instance, INR for Indians who are depositing their money. And that money is ultimately utilized towards trading with crypto exchanges. And this facilitation, Sandeep, is done by the crypto exchange. Now, obviously, behind these accounts, they have banks who are authorized dealers, who are authorized by the RBI to do foreign exchange. That's not an issue. But today, under the RBI regime, there is a new framework which the Reserve Bank has come out with, which is called the payment aggregator regime, which is associated with those payment businesses which are actually involved in collection of payments from customers and facilitating the settlement of payments through their channels. Even in a payment aggregator scenario, the monies are facilitated, Sandeep, through an escrow mechanism, akin to how a crypto exchange does. So one thing which we will have to also evaluate, and this is probably when the payment aggregator regime will kick in, because it's still early days and entities have not got licenses, and that regulations is still to come into effect, is that when a crypto exchange is operating a platform through which money is getting collected and facilitated between users, is a crypto exchange also performing some kind of a payment facilitation function, something akin to what a payment aggregator does? Simply because I'm asking a bank to open an escrow, is that enough? Because if I look at the payment aggregator regime, Sandeep, I would be recognized as a payment system operator. And what does a payment system operator mean? A payment system operator is somebody who's actually involved in payment and settlement service, which is regulated by the RBI. And this service is subject to a license requirement. Unless and until you obtain a license under the payment and settlement systems law, you are not authorized to perform this function. So I think this is another nuance which will need to be seen. FEMA, FDI, and also the issue of whether anything which a crypto exchange does can be associated with the payment system or not, let alone the issue of whether it's a legal tender or not, because I think we are probably being too over optimistic if we are looking cryptocurrency to be a money equivalent in the times. So I think this is what I believe, to me, we are the 3 or 4 buckets which will need to be considered, and these legal issues will need to be tackled if we are to say with certainty that the industry is out of the woods and now we are free from any kind of uncertainty which prevails.
Definitely, means that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like there are a lot of moving parts that probably the regulators and the government need to take care of before giving any kind of clarity. Because if any of those moving parts are not touched, I think it will further create more confusion and more of instability in the cryptocurrency market as such. You have touched upon, say, briefly on the foreign exchange, as well as the SEBI regulations and derivatives and all those regulatory issues as well. But with thousands of types of cryptocurrency coming in the market, you also see different types of cryptocurrency coming into the market. So you have NFTs, you have stable coins, you have huge variation, and every day you can keep on learning one new technical terms, and it's getting that wide. And then you also have certain underlying technology that probably rely on some sort of token that needs to be issued. There are certain platforms that are coming up, like Kleros, which is a decentralized dispute resolution platform which uses blockchain, gives some sort of token to their judges or arbitrators, whatever you call them. You have another platform, Jude, and on the similar lines, there are more platforms that are coming up. Do you think if tomorrow government takes a very strict action against these kind of tokens of cryptocurrency, that kind of technological development will be impacted, or the government could come up with a certain set of legislation to make sure that those technical developments do grow? Do you see the similar kind of challenge in growing that kind of technological advancement in India, which is directly or indirectly linked with the cryptocurrency as such?
Yeah, so I think the last line which you stated to me will be central to, I think, the answer, which is, if any of these tokens, there are various forms, as you said. I talked about Messi getting fan tokens when there's a transfer happening. There are investment tokens, which you would have heard very popularly known as ICOs, initial coin offerings, where companies like IPOs issue ICOs, where they open up financing options where individuals can get these tokens akin to securities. They can hold these tokens and actually invest in the company, be part of the let's say journey of the company, so to speak. So investment token is one. There are utility tokens, and there are various kind of tokens, I think, which you articulated, which are associated with digital services offerings which are offered by businesses. To me, to your question, if I were to simply address it, I think all will depend on how India looks to categorize cryptocurrency or virtual currency. If we are to say look at banning any form of private currencies which are virtual in nature, then unfortunately all these forms of innovations will also fall within that realm. And it's very difficult to then differentiate what is an investment token and what is a utility token, and how do you differentiate, because they're all virtual tokens. So if we were to say only India is only, let's say, not fine with a cryptocurrency which is associated as a medium of exchange, then we could look at other such innovations which may come. But if the government comes out with such a wide restriction, which is likely to restrict virtual currencies in any form, then unfortunately all these forms of tokens will also get impacted. Because what is really happening is, you are as an individual purchasing that token and it is giving certain value to you. So it is not simply about legal tender anymore, right? It can also be used as a digital asset. So but I think, to my mind, the rational way to look at it is that if we do follow the path of how certain other jurisdictions have done, say something what like Singapore has done, or Japan has done, or US has done, if we follow that path, I think then perhaps there is light at the end of the tunnel, because then we are looking at digital assets being traded. There can be licensing, there can be regulatory requirements associated with those businesses, but at least there is no outright ban, Sandeep. So I think a lot will depend on, I don't think there is a very clear answer to what your question is, because it will really depend on how the government decides to categorize the restriction. Does it say any form of virtual currency is not permitted, or only says that virtual currency which is used as an exchange is not permitted? I think that is going to be the answer to that question.
Yeah, it all, I think, depends upon the first step of the government when it comes to regulation. And from there on, we can actually see where it goes in terms of the other tokens and other types of, assets that are being discussed about. And last thing that I wanted to touch upon is you have extensive experience in terms of, data protection and privacy laws as well. What kind of overlap do you see between digital assets on one hand being anonymous, and to unearth the person who is behind certain transactions, you have to do some sort of doing, you have to do some sort of compliance, you have to ask KYC, and a lot of, so it starts losing its one value that's associated with it. And then I wouldn't say that's very strong privacy laws that we have compared to, say, a European jurisdiction, but we do have certain data protection and privacy law at a basic level. So do you see with the advancement in, say, cryptocurrency laws, there will be an overlap? And do you see that our data privacy laws would change according to that? Do you think there will be higher standards, lower standards, how it will react? And what is your experience or understanding in terms of how it's happening in, say, European market as well? Because there are certain jurisdictions there that have adopted cryptocurrency in some or other form, but you have GDPR over there. So how does those two things relate with each other? Because the reason why I'm asking this question is coming from, say, a lawyer or a law student who wants to work probably in tech sphere. I think the most exciting and the most glamorous topic that is being discussed these days among all the generation is, cryptocurrency. And when you discuss about technology, I don't think you can distance yourself from data protection, privacy laws and stuff. So what kind of overlap do you see in these two different domains?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question, and I think the reason I think believe it's a little complex question is because when you look at the law which exists today as far as data privacy is concerned, and what is likely to come in India, which is the proposed personal data protection bill, which will come into a legislation. I think the law is going to regulate personal data, Sandeep. So it will only regulate identifiable data of an individual and not data which is associated with the transaction or the business per se, right? So when we talk about an individual today, when you talk about financial data, which may be bank account, it may be PAN number, maybe various things depending on the nature of transaction. If the law which we are looking at is going to only deal with personal data, I don't think the crypto sphere will be any different. If the crypto transactions involves any exchange of private data, which is personal data classification, considering that it falls within that realm of personal data, then it will obviously get impacted. But today, the way I look at it, it's a P2P anonymous, pseudonymous kind of a technology where very little is shared, at least between parties. Yes, the crypto exchange with whom you're opening an account is doing your KYC. So for that purpose, they're collecting your personal data. They will also be processing that data for certain use cases, certain purposes, for which they will obtain your consent in accordance with the current law. And I don't see this to be any different even when it is the proposed law, because even when you look at the proposed law as far as India is concerned, it is following a GDPR kind of a regime, a consent-based approach, which is going to only regulate collection and processing of personal data. So I don't think there is going to be any differentiation, so to speak, when you're dealing with crypto exchange. And I don't think there's going to be any uniqueness to how personal data is going to be handled from a data privacy standpoint, because agnostic of whichever sector you belong to, Sandeep, if you are in the business of processing any identifiable data of an individual, you will fall within the realm of this law. So I don't, if you ask for my personal view, I don't think we are going to see any separate regulation or a separate carve out, which is going to be there only for crypto transactions. It is going to be akin to what is there in other spheres. Yes, once the DPA, that is the Data Protection Authority under the new law, gets constituted, it may come out with certain guidelines, certain guidances as far as how certain specific sectors need to deal with it. And actually, it will also depend a lot on which sector specific regulator gets to deal with crypto exchange in the first place. So when you look at a crypto transaction, as I said earlier, is it going to be RBI? Is it going to be SEBI? Is it going to be a third regulator? So it could also be a certain technical requirement or a certain privacy requirement, which may flow from the sector specific regulators. Let me take a very simple example. Today, the RBI, agnostic of the data privacy laws, also requires data localization when it comes to payments data. Now, RBI is not the data privacy regulator, right? But it is still, being a financial services regulator, looking at payments entities, coming out with certain prescriptions. So I don't think, even if there is a certain data privacy legislation which comes out pursuant to the passing of the PDP bill, is going to be very industry specific. Sector specific regulators will still have a role to play. Of course, there is going to be this comprehensive legislation which is going to have the guiding, which is going to have the guiding principles, which is going to have the framework whenever there is any issue when it comes to data privacy, or there is any breach associated with data which is involving personal data. But I think if you ask me strictly from a cryptocurrency perspective, I haven't seen too many jurisdictions coming out with sector specific nuances as far as crypto is concerned. I think right now, probably it's too early a stage. They're right now dealing with how a crypto asset needs to be dealt from various aspects.
Probably that's the second step.
Yeah.
That they have to take. Yeah, means that makes a lot of sense as well. And thank you so much for answering all the questions. Such a detail, means it's really humbling experience to hear from you and to know about the different space that the cryptocurrency is touching. Means if a student or a young lawyer or anyone who's practicing in say policy or law field, coming from say tax background, probably corporate background, technology background, I think the cryptocurrency is something that they have to watch out for. It's definitely going to impact their sphere as well. There are a lot of moving parts. Means I'm just trying to think how many different legislations touching right now, and how it's not an easy task for probably the government as well to structure it and present in a better way. And probably it will all depend on taking insights from the practitioners in the legal field, in the policy field, and also those people who are working in the tech sphere to see what that they can best in terms of regulating and providing some sort of guidance into this specific domain. But let's hope that there's something that fruitful comes out of the discussion from the government side. And thank you so much for taking out time for this specific workshop. I'm 100% sure that the audience have gained a lot of knowledge. There's a lot that they can probably do their own research and try to figure out what is happening in this specific sphere. So we really appreciate your presence and time. Thank you so much, and thanks a lot to Better Results as well for organizing this workshop.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sandeep. And I'd again like to say that I really appreciate that you've been unwell, but you still continue to moderate it. Really appreciate it. Thank you. You've been very kind. And thank you to all the listeners. Hopefully, you would have learned something, as I have learned while I've spoken to Sandeep. I think every conversation is, I think, a learning experience. And as I said, nobody can classify himself or herself to be an expert. I think it's early days. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bettering Results, for this opportunity. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.